A few minutes later, and from her hiding position, Edekere saw the side door to the gate of the mansion opened, and a uniformed security guard came out scanning the ground. She saw him stand over the baby and then hurriedly ran through the side door into the massive courtyard of the mansion. Within 10 minutes, a woman dressed in a nightgown came out from the same side door with a man dressed in pajamas. While the woman picked up the baby, the man read the note left on the baby, and the security guard scanned the outside perimeters of the edifice in search of a clue to the abandoned baby. A week passed, and Edekere, now temporarily housed by Gabil and his family, walked by 64 Edison Avenue, eager to find out what might have happened to her son. She stopped as she noticed a large notice pinned to the fence gate. Nanny wanted. Apply within. She went back the next day after consulting Mrs. Gabil. Her heart skipped on arrival. This could be her chance to stay close to her son, to make sure he's cared for. Without hesitation, she walked up to the mansion's entrance, knocked on the side door, and was confronted by the security guard. Edekere was led by the security guard to Mr. and Mrs. Odunetan Egan. The couple, in their early 40s, sat across from her. Mrs. Egan, a stern and beautiful woman, eyed Edekere with skepticism. Mr. Egan, more welcoming, gave her a polite smile with the following dialogue.
I see you have experience with children.
Yes, I do. I've cared for babies and children all my life.
Good. You'll be taking care of our son, Jackson Jr. He's just 2 months old. My wife and I are very busy, and we need someone reliable. You can start immediately.
Edekere smiled, fighting the tears that threatened to overwhelm her. She just secured the job she needed. Despite Edekere's dedication to her job, Mrs. Egan grew more suspicious and uncomfortable with Edekere's closeness to her son. She once found that the expensive baby formula bought for Jackson Jr. was not depleting as she expected it to be. She harshly summoned Edekere for explanation, and Edekere could only say that the baby often preferred water to the formula. Edekere spent the next few years working as Jackson's nanny, creating a bond with him that ran deeper than just that of nanny and child. Jackson, or Jonita, as he was originally called, grew attached to her, preferring her presence to anyone else's. He called her Mama, and she held him close every night, whispering quiet words of love and protection. That did not go down well with Mrs. Egan. One evening, after a tense dinner, Mrs. Egan looked at her husband and said,
I think it's time we let her go. She's too close to Jackson. It's unhealthy. Besides, she may soon know we adopted the baby without official documents and expose us.
She's been a good nanny, Domina. Let's not make hasty decisions.
But Mr. Egan, always kind-hearted and understanding, dismissed her concerns. But Mrs. Egan continues to push, always eyeing Edekere with thinly veiled jealousy, especially as Jackson Jr. preferred the company of Edekere to hers. Jackson Jr. grew to know Edekere as mother, helping with schoolwork, tending to his domestic needs, and teaching him the values of life. He appreciated the nightly prayers and counseling that formed a solid base in his formative years. There was visible evidence that Jackson Jr. tilted toward Edekere than any other member of Egan's household, until an inevitable separation happened. Coley Tango, a business associate of Mr. Jackson Odunetan Egan, had keenly observed the dedicated demeanor of Edekere and her beautiful figure anytime he visited his friend. Mr. Tango divorced his wife about 5 years ago and resolved not to rush into another marriage. He discussed Edekere with Mr. Egan, and the latter highly commended his son's nanny and gave his support to Mr. Tango. Both concluded on approaching Edekere, and Mr. Egan played a pivotal role in Coley and Edekere coming together. It was a mixed grid for Mrs. Domina Egan. She did not quite fancy Edekere getting married to a man of their class, and thereby becoming a classy woman like her. Alternatively, she wanted Edekere out of her son's life. A few months later, Edekere took Koli to her uncle, Ediga Nokpagogo, for the traditional marriage rites. Ediga was now broke. The pharmaceutical business he seized from Edekere went bankrupt for lack of business acumen. He sought help from Edekere's new husband, but she blocked him. Edekere assured her uncle that she would come and assist him at the appropriate time. Jackson Jr. graduated as a lawyer at 21 and was called to the bar at 23 after completing mandatory law school. Throughout his years in the university, he maintained his closeness to Edekere. He spent most of his semester vacations in the home of Mr. and Mrs. Tanko. Jackson Jr. spent a month with his foster parents after he was called to the bar. He then asked for permission to visit Mrs. Edekere Tango, but Domina tried to decline his request. She had hitherto instructed Jackson Jr. to seek permission to visit his old nanny. Mr. O'Donovan approved the request, and Jackson Jr. was granted a week's visit. On the third day, at the home of the Tangos, and as Jackson lounged on the couch with Edekere, who was nursing a full-blown pregnancy, she took a deep breath and released a bombshell.
Jackson, I need to tell you something important.
What is it, Mama?
I am your biological mother. Your real name is Janita Jr., and I named you after my late father, Janita Nokpagogo. Another reason for choosing that name is my belief that you are my reincarnated father.
You're my real mother?
Yes, I am your mother, Jackson. I am. So sorry it took me this long to tell you.
With a heavy heart, Edekere thundered the truth she had carried with her all these years. He looked at her, confusion in his eyes. She narrated every detail of his birth and how he ended up with the Egans. The news of Jackson's true paternity caused an uproar in the Egan household. Mrs. Egan was furious, her jealousy reaching a boiling point. She argued with her husband, accusing Edekere of trying to take her son away from her after laboriously raising him to become a lawyer. She screamed, "This woman had no place in his life. Jackson is my son. She was just a nanny." But Mr. Egan, who has always had a soft spot for Edekere, didn't budge. He had a total review of the situation right from its inception. He tried to calm his wife, but strongly supported her for a paternity test to ascertain Edekere's claims. Mrs. Domina Egan sought the services of a family lawyer and sued Edekere for proof that she was the biological mother of Jackson Jr. Mr. Egan did not quite rely on the outcome of the court option, bearing in mind that neither he nor his wife possessed official documents for the adoption of Jackson Jr. 3 years later, after multiple court hearings, DNA tests were conducted. The results came back. Edekere is Jackson's biological mother. In the courtroom, Edekere broke down in tears. Jackson stood beside her, comforting the woman who raised him, the woman who gave him life. The judge finally ruled in Edekere's favor, granting her full parental rights. Mrs. Egan, devastated, was forced to accept the truth, but her bitterness remains. Jackson Jr. summoned a reconciliatory meeting between the Egans and the Tangos, and it was resolved that the status quo that existed be maintained. He pleaded to remain a son to both families and prayed that God, in His infinite grace, bless the Egans with a biological son. And indeed, God answered Jackson Jr.'s prayer. Mrs. Domina Egan became pregnant a few months later and gave birth to a son a year later. A year later, Jackson Jr. sued Ediga Nokpagogo to court for unlawfully dispossessing his mother of her late father's estate. And as the court proceedings were ongoing, Bobby Durango, the biological father of Jackson Jr., appeared. He had served his years of imprisonment for fraud, became born again in prison, and now a pastor of a church. Pastor Bobby Durango visited Ediga Nokpagogo, who perfected the reconnection of Pastor Durango to his son, Jackson Jr. With that reconciliatory development, the clan of the Nokpagogo family intervened and pleaded with Jackson Jr. to withdraw the court case. He went on to accept his biological father and reverted to his original identity, Jonaki Jackson Durango Esquire.
Thanks for watching Jackson is My Son, Part 2. Hope you enjoyed it. Please watch Part 1 to get the gist of the story, if you have not done so. Like, share, and subscribe for more videos.